She had been sitting there for 32 minutes when he said the words. The latte in front of her had gone lukewarm. Outside, Christmas lights blinked red and green through frosted windows. But inside, humiliation, raw and public. Everyone had heard him. The waiter had frozen mid-step, eyes wide with secondhand embarrassment. A black woman in a secondhand dress alone on Christmas Eve. They whispered. They stared, but she couldn't move. At 8:04 p.m., he walked in, tailored black suit, visible ink on his neck, measured steps. A man who looked like danger wrapped in expensive fabric. But he approached her table anyway. Because the most devastating thing in that cafe wasn't what Murphy had said. It was that someone had witnessed her trying to hold herself together while falling apart. Isabella Edwards had learned early in life that respectability was a luxury she couldn't afford. In job interviews, you smiled through microaggressions or you stayed unemployed. In hospitals, you apologized for not having insurance or your child didn't get care. In relationships, well, her last relationship had ended 6 years ago when she'd told him about the pregnancy, and his last words were still lodged somewhere between her ribs and her spine. I'm not ready to be a father. You're on your own. She hadn't cried then. She didn't cry now. Sitting in this upscale cafe on Riverside Drive with its marble tables and crystal chandeliers hanging from vaulted ceilings, the place smelled like espresso and old money, and the couple at the next table kept glancing at her with that particular brand of pity reserved for single mothers being rejected during the holidays. Isabella kept her gaze on the tablecloth, watching brown liquid spread where her cup had fallen. She had checked her phone 18 times in the last hour. No messages, no missed calls, just the text from Mrs. Lucas saying Felix's fever had spiked to 102. Should I take him to urgent care? Not yet, Isabella had texted back, because urgent care meant copays she didn't have. Give him the children's Tylenol. I'll be home soon. Soon. As if she could just stand up and leave. As if Murphy's words hadn't pinned her to this chair like a specimen under glass. I can't marry a woman with another man's mistake. He's not what you're used to, her coworker Shanice had said over lunch at that food court with the $6 combo meals. But he's stable, Bella. Got a good job. No kids. His mama goes to my church, and I think you need stable right now. Isabella had almost said no. She had 3 shifts to cover, a mountain of medical bills threatening collections, a 6-year-old son whose liver was failing while she watched helplessly from the sidelines. She didn't have time for blind dates or small talk or whatever this reconciliation dinner was supposed to be, but Shanice had looked at her with that expression, part pity, part concern, and Isabella had heard herself say yes before she could think better of it. Now she was here, alone, destroyed. The waiter approached again, a young man with kind eyes and an apron that had seen better days. He set down a glass of water without a word, just a small nod that managed to convey both compassion and discomfort in equal measure. Isabella wrapped her hands around the cold glass. It was something to hold on to. That was something. She didn't know why she stayed. Logic said to leave. Dignity said to leave. Every survival instinct she'd honed over 6 years of single motherhood said to stand up, walk out, and never look back. But shame was heavy. It pinned her to velvet cushions, made her watch snowflakes gather on window ledges, forced her to listen to the low murmur of judgment, and the occasional burst of laughter from the corner table where a family was celebrating something. A promotion, maybe? Or just being together without apology. Isabella checked her phone again. 8:03. She had been sitting here for 32 minutes since Murphy walked out. 32 minutes of her life she would never get back. Sitting in a cafe that probably cost more per meal than she made in a day, waiting for the floor to swallow her whole. And then she felt it. The weight of someone's attention. Different from the curious stares. Deliberate. Focused. She looked up. He was standing near the entrance, and the cafe had gone quiet in that particular way spaces do when danger walks in. Not loud danger. Not obvious. But the kind that makes people check exits and lower their voices. He was Korean, she thought, though she couldn't be sure. Mid-30s maybe, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that had seen things most people only heard about in whispered warnings. His suit was probably worth more than her car. His shoes gleamed, and on his neck, just visible above his collar, was the edge of a tattoo. Ink that spoke of affiliations, of worlds she'd only seen in movies. He was looking at her. Not at the scene, not at the spilled coffee or the empty chair where Murphy had been, At her, and then he moved. The cafe held its breath as he crossed the floor. His steps measured, purposeful. People recognized him, or at least recognized what he represented. The bartender's hand stilled on a bottle. The hostess stepped back. Even the couple at the next table stopped mid-conversation. He stopped at Isabella's table. Up close, she could see the details Shanice's church ladies would clutch their pearls over. The expensive watch, the perfectly tailored suit that did nothing to hide the controlled power beneath it, the faint scar above his left eyebrow. The way he held himself, like someone who'd never had to raise his voice to be obeyed. In his hands was a gift, wrapped in gold paper with a red silk ribbon. Elegant, deliberate, impossible. "You deserve better than a man who leaves," he said, and his voice was lower than she'd expected, accented in ways that made her think of soul and secrets and things she had no business knowing about. He set the gift on her table, right next to her fallen coffee cup. Isabella stared at him, at it, at the surreal impossibility of this moment. "In my culture," he continued, "we have a saying, a flower does not think of competing with the flower next to it. It just blooms." His eyes met hers, and Isabella felt something shift in her chest, something dangerous. "You are blooming, Isabella Edwards." He knew her name. He'd been watching, and he, the stranger, glanced toward the door where Murphy had disappeared, and something cold flickered in his expression, was blind. Isabella's throat was too tight for words. Her hands were shaking. This man, this dangerous, impossible man, had witnessed everything, had seen her humiliation, had seen Murphy call Felix a mistake, had seen her sit here, drowning in shame, unable to move, and he'd brought her a gift. "Who?" Her voice cracked. She tried again. "Who are you?" The corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, something more complicated. "My name is Dong Min." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. Set it beside the gift. Black card. Silver lettering in English and Korean. A phone number. Nothing else. "When you're ready for help, Isabella, call me." Help with what? But even as she asked, she knew. He'd heard Murphy mention Felix. Had probably heard more than that if he'd been watching as long as his presence suggested. Dong Min's eyes softened, just fractionally. Just enough to be devastating. "With everything," he said simply. And then he did something that made the entire cafe forget to breathe. He reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched the back of her hand. Just his fingertips. Just for a second. But the gesture was so gentle, so deliberate, so utterly at odds with everything else about him that Isabella felt tears finally break through her carefully constructed walls. 32 minutes is long enough to sit in shame that was never yours to carry, Dong Min said quietly. "Go home to your son, Isabella. And when you're ready, when Felix needs you to be ready, call me." He knew Felix's name too. Isabella watched him turn and walk back toward the entrance. Watched the cafe slowly remember how to move and breathe. Watched the gift sitting on her table wrapped in gold and secrets and questions she wasn't sure she wanted answers to. The card was still there, black, simple, waiting. Outside, snow had started to fall. Inside, Isabella Edwards realized that in the span of 32 minutes, her entire world had shattered, and then, impossibly, been offered a chance at something she couldn't even name yet. She picked up the gift. It was heavier than it looked. She picked up the card. The number gleamed silver in the cafe's soft light. She picked up her phone and texted Mrs. Lucas. "I'm on my way home." And then, before she could stop herself, before logic could intervene, Isabella Edwards added one more contact to her phone. Dong Min. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know what he wanted. She didn't know why a man who radiated danger and power and secrets had witnessed her worst moment and offered her a gift instead of pity. A dangerous stranger. $10,000. A sick child who needs a miracle. If you need to know what happens when desperation meets power, subscribe right now. Because Isabella just accepted help from a man whose world operates in shadows and there's no turning back. But as she stood to leave, as she walked past whispers and stares with her head finally held high, Isabella realized something. For the first time in 6 years, she wasn't facing the night alone. Someone had seen her. Really seen her. Not the single mother. Not the struggling woman. Not the mistake Murphy had named her. Just Isabella. blooming. And that, she thought as she stepped out into the snow, was worth more than all the respectability in the world. Isabella Edwards had perfected the art of making herself small. It was a survival skill learned over 6 years of single motherhood, honed through countless moments when being invisible felt safer than being seen. She'd mastered the apologetic smile when calling in sick because Felix had another doctor's appointment. The grateful nod when charity clinics offered just enough medication to last until the next crisis. The quiet acceptance when well-meaning church ladies whispered about those girls who make poor choices while handing her bags of donated clothes that never quite fit. 3 jobs kept them afloat. Barely. Morning shift at the diner on 5th Street. Afternoon data entry for a medical billing company she could do from home between Felix's naps, and night stalking at the 24-hour grocery store after Mrs. Lucas came over to watch him sleep. Isabella calculated her life in shifts and copays, in dollar menus and generic prescriptions, in the narrow space between rent and groceries where medical bills came to die unpaid. Felix's liver was failing. Had been failing since he was 3. Some genetic disorder the doctors explained in words Isabella didn't fully understand but whose consequences she lived with every single day. The yellow tinge to his skin that makeup commercials called golden, but medical textbooks called jaundice. The way his belly swelled with fluid retention, while his arms and legs grew thinner. The exhaustion that made him fall asleep during cartoons. His small body too tired to laugh at the funny parts. The wait list for a pediatric liver transplant was long. The cost was astronomical. And Isabella's insurance, the bare minimum her diner job provided, covered almost nothing. She'd been drowning long before she met Murphy. The memory of Felix's biological father lived in her body like scar tissue. Dante, 22 years old, smooth-talking, full of promises about their future together, right up until the moment she'd shown him the positive pregnancy test. She could still see his face shutting down, closing her out like a door slamming. Could still hear his mother's voice on the phone 2 days later, sharp and cold. "My son has a full scholarship to Howard, a future. He's not throwing that away for some girl who couldn't keep her legs closed. You made your bed, sweetheart. Now lie in it." Isabella had been 19. Terrified. Alone. She'd lied in that bed for 6 years now, and it had never stopped feeling like punishment. Murphy had seemed like redemption. An accountant with a steady salary, a modest apartment, a mother who baked pound cake for church fundraisers. He'd approached Isabella at the diner, left generous tips, asked about her day with what seemed like genuine interest. When he finally asked her to dinner, Isabella had felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. Hope. "I like you," Murphy had said on their 3rd date, holding her hand across the table at an Olive Garden. "You're real, grounded. Not like these women out here chasing fantasies." Isabella had waited 3 months before telling him about Felix. Another month before he met her son. She'd coached Felix beforehand. Desperate. "Be good, baby. Say please and thank you. Show Mr. Murphy your best manners." Felix had been perfect. Sweet and polite, shaking Murphy's hand with the solemn gravity only 6-year-olds could muster. He'd shown Murphy his coloring books, his collection of Hot Wheels cars arranged by color, the picture he'd drawn of their family 3 stick figures holding hands under a smiling sun. Murphy had looked at that picture for a long time. Too long. "His father's not in the picture?" Murphy had asked later, after Felix had gone to bed. "No," Isabella had said, hating how defensive she sounded. "He left when I was pregnant. I've raised Felix alone." Murphy had nodded slowly, processing, calculating. "My mother, she's traditional, you know? She has certain expectations about family, about presentation." Isabella had felt ice creep into her stomach. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe we take things slow. Maybe when you meet her, we don't mention Felix right away. Just until she gets to know you first. See what an amazing woman you are without complications." Complications. That's what her son had become. A complication in Murphy's perfectly calculated life. But Isabella had agreed. Because Murphy offered stability. Because Felix needed health insurance better than what the diner provided. Because Isabella was so tired of fighting alone that she'd convinced herself compromise was the same thing as love. She'd hidden Felix like a shameful secret for 3 months. Made excuses why Murphy couldn't come over. Met him at restaurants and coffee shops and his apartment where evidence of her son didn't exist. She'd felt herself disappearing a little more each time, becoming the woman Murphy needed her to be, instead of the woman she was. Then Felix had gotten sick. Really sick. Emergency room sick. And Isabella had called Murphy from the hospital at 2 in the morning, terrified and alone, begging him to come. Just to sit with her. Just so she wouldn't have to face the doctor's grim faces by herself. He'd come. Stayed for an hour. Looked at Felix's small body hooked to machines and hadn't said a word. Just kissed Isabella's forehead and left, promising to call later. He'd called 3 days later. Asked if they could talk. Suggested dinner. Somewhere nice. To reconnect, he'd said. To figure out where we go from here. Isabella had heard the hesitation in his voice. Had known, somewhere deep in her gut, that where we go from here meant nowhere. But hope was a stubborn thing. And she'd put on her best dress, a black sheath she'd found at Goodwill. Pressed until the second-hand wrinkles disappeared and taken the bus to Riverside Drive. The Solstice Cafe was expensive. The kind of place where people ordered wine by the vintage and appetizers cost more than Isabella's weekly grocery budget. Crystal chandeliers caught the Christmas lights from outside and threw rainbow patterns across white tablecloths. Everyone looked comfortable here, like they belonged. Like spending $60 on dinner was normal instead of obscene. Isabella had felt like an imposter from the moment she walked in. Murphy had arrived 15 minutes late. No apology. No warm greeting. He'd sat down across from her with the careful distance of someone trying not to catch something contagious. I've been thinking, he'd started. And Isabella had known. Had felt the rejection building like a wave about to crash. She'd tried to salvage it anyway. Felix is doing better. The doctors think the medication might. Isabella. Murphy's voice had been firm. Final. This isn't working. The cafe had seemed too quiet suddenly. Or maybe Isabella had just become hyper-aware of the couples at nearby tables. The soft jazz playing through expensive speakers. The waiter hovering at a distance. What do you mean? She'd known exactly what he meant. I care about you. I do. But I need to be realistic about my future. About what I can handle. Murphy had straightened his tie, a nervous gesture that made him look smaller somehow. My mother met someone from church. Her friend's daughter. A teacher. No kids. No. Complications. And I think, you're breaking up with me because of Felix. Isabella had heard her own voice like it belonged to someone else. Flat. Dead. I'm making a practical decision about my life. Murphy had looked at her then, and Isabella had seen something cruel flicker in his eyes. Something that had maybe always been there, hidden under nice guy politeness. I can't marry a woman with another man's mistake. He'd said it loudly. Loud enough that the table next to them had gone silent. Loud enough that the waiter had frozen mid-step. Loud enough that Isabella had felt every eye in the expensive cafe turn toward her. Another man's mistake. Not Felix. Not her beautiful, brave, sick little boy who drew pictures of families and asked if Santa knew their new address. A mistake. A complication. A reason she wasn't worth choosing. Isabella's hand had trembled, knocking over her latte. Brown liquid had spread across the white tablecloth like shame made visible, and she'd watched it spread, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything but exist in this moment of public humiliation. Murphy had stood, straightened his tie again. I'm sorry it has to be like this. But it's better we're honest now than waste more time. Waste more time. As if the 6 months she'd spent shrinking herself into someone he could present to his mother had been nothing. As if Felix was nothing. As if she was nothing. Then he'd walked out. Left her sitting there with spilled coffee and staring strangers and the crushing weight of confirmation that every cruel thing she'd ever believed about herself was true. She didn't deserve stability. She didn't deserve love. She didn't deserve a partner who would stand beside her while her son fought for his life. She deserved exactly this. To sit alone in a cafe she couldn't afford, wearing a dress from a thrift store, being exactly the tragic figure everyone expected a single black mother to be. Isabella had checked her phone 18 times in 32 minutes, desperate for distraction. The text from Mrs. Lucas glowed on her screen. Felix's fever at 102. Should I take him to urgent care? Not yet, Isabella had typed back, because urgent care meant copays she didn't have. I'll be home soon. But she couldn't move. Shame was heavy. It pinned her to the velvet chair, made her watch other people's happiness like looking through a window at a life she'd never have. Made her believe that Murphy was right, that Felix was a mistake, that she was the kind of woman who got exactly what she deserved. 32 minutes. That's how long it took for Isabella Edwards' world to shatter completely. and then she felt it. The weight of someone watching. Not the curious, pitying stares of the other diners. Something different. Focused. Deliberate. She looked up, and everything changed. The gift sat on Isabella's Kit Lucas counter, like a question she wasn't ready to answer. She'd made it home by 9:15, the bus ride a blur of Christmas lights and her own reflection in dark windows. Mrs. Lucas had been waiting by the door, coat already on, face creased with the particular worry that came from watching someone else's sick child. His fever broke around 8. Mrs. Lucas had said, patting Isabella's arm with her soft, age-spotted hand. He's sleeping now. I gave him the Tylenol like you said. Isabella had thanked her, pressed $40 into her hand money she couldn't afford but couldn't not give, and watched the older woman shuffle down the hallway to her own apartment 3 doors down. Then she'd stood in her own doorway, keys still in her hand, staring at the gold-wrapped package she'd carried home like contraband. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and Felix's soft breathing from the bedroom. Isabella set her purse down, took off her coat, removed her shoes, the good ones she only wore to job interviews and apparently disastrous dinners. The second-hand dress suddenly felt too tight. Too much like a costume she'd worn to play a part she'd never been cast for. She should check on Felix. She should eat something. She should do literally anything except stand here staring at a gift from a dangerous stranger who somehow knew her name and her son's name and had witnessed the worst moment of her life with eyes that had seen too much but looked at her like she mattered anyway. Isabella picked up the package. It was heavier than it looked, substantial in a way that made her hands shake slightly. The gold paper caught the Kit Lucas's fluorescent light. The red silk ribbon was the kind that cost extra, the kind that made wrapping presents feel like an art form instead of a necessity. She set it back down, walked to Felix's room instead. Her son was small for 6, always had been. The doctors said it was partly the malnutrition that came with liver disease, partly genetics, partly bad luck in a life that seemed determined to deal him losing hands. He lay curled on his side, one arm tucked under his pillow, the other clutching the stuffed elephant Isabella had found at a yard sale 3 years ago. His skin had that yellow tinge that never quite went away anymore. That marker of a body slowly poisoning itself, because the organ meant to filter toxins couldn't keep up. But he was beautiful. God, he was beautiful. With his father's long eyelashes and Isabella's wide mouth, with a smile that could light up rooms even when his body was failing him, with a laugh that made her believe in something bigger than medical bills and public humiliation and men who called children mistakes. Isabella pressed a hand to his forehead. Cool now. The Tylenol had done its job. She watched his chest rise and fall, counting breaths like prayers, like proof that they'd survived another day. Mama? Felix's voice was sleep-rough. Barely a whisper. Shh, baby, I'm here. Go back to sleep. Did Mr. Murphy come? Isabella's throat tightened. Yes. Sweetheart, is he gonna be my daddy? The question landed like a punch. Felix had asked it before, cautiously. Like he knew it was dangerous territory but couldn't help hoping anyway. Every kid in his kindergarten class had daddies who came to field trips and father-daughter dances that got hastily renamed to family events when teachers remembered not everyone had traditional families. Felix had been collecting father figures in his mind like trading cards. Mr. Murphy, the mailman who always said hello, the security guard at the hospital who let Felix push the elevator buttons. No, baby, Isabella said softly. He's not. Felix was quiet for a long moment. Then, that's okay. I still got you. Isabella kissed his forehead, tasting salt and love, and the particular fear that came with knowing you were all your child had between him and a world that didn't care if he lived or died. Yeah, baby, you got me. Always. She waited until his breathing evened out again before returning to the Kit Lucas, to the gift that felt like a grenade wrapped in gold paper. Isabella had learned to trust her instincts the hard way. When Dante's mother had called her a mistake, Isabella's instincts had screamed danger. When Murphy had asked her to hide Felix, her gut had twisted with warning. And tonight, when Dong Min had touched her hand with a gentleness that felt more dangerous than violence, every alarm in her body had gone off. But beneath the alarms was something else. Something she didn't want to name. Something that felt like recognition. I saw how you held yourself together while he tore you apart. That kind of strength is rare. No one had ever called her strong. Struggling. Yes. Surviving. Maybe. But strong? That word belonged to women who had their lives together. who made choices instead of accepting whatever scraps they were offered. That word didn't belong to single mothers working 3 jobs and failing anyway. Except Dongmin had said it like he meant it. Like he'd seen something in her that Isabella had stopped looking for in herself. She picked up the gift again. This time, she didn't set it back down. The ribbon came loose easily, like it had been tied by someone who knew how to make beautiful things that could be undone with a single pull. The gold paper fell away to reveal a simple white box. No brand name, no logo, just expensive weight and the kind of quality that didn't need to announce itself. Isabella lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in white tissue paper, was a Christmas ornament. An angel, delicate and detailed, made of crystal or glass or something that caught the Kit Lucas light and threw it back in rainbow fragments. It was the kind of ornament that belonged on trees in houses with mantles and matching stockings, not in apartments where the tree was a 2-foot plastic thing from the dollar store, because real trees cost money and dropped needles that Felix might put in his mouth. But it was beautiful. Achingly beautiful. The angel's face was serene, hands folded in prayer, wings spread wide like protection incarnate. Like hope made visible. Beneath the ornament was an envelope. Thick. Cream-colored. Isabella's hands shook as she opened it. The note inside was handwritten in neat, precise letters. Every mother is an angel, especially those fighting alone. Call me when you're ready for help. DM. And beneath the note, folded neatly, were $100 bills. Isabella counted them twice, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. 100 bills. $10,000. More money than she'd ever seen in one place in her entire life. Also in the envelope, a business card for Dr. Catherine Huang, pediatric hepatology specialist at Mount Sinai. A phone number written in the same neat handwriting. A date and time tomorrow, 10 a.m., with a single word, confirmed. Isabella sank into a Kit Lucas chair, the money still in her hands. This was insane. This was dangerous. This was accepting help from a man she didn't know, who clearly moved in circles where $10,000 was gift money, where pulling strings to get emergency appointments with specialists was apparently just something you could do. This was everything her mother had warned her about. Never take money from men you don't know, never owe debts you can't repay, never trust anyone who offers help without strings. Because there are always strings. Isabella. Always. But Felix was dying. And respectability had never saved anyone. Isabella didn't sleep that night. She sat at the Kit Lucas table with $10,000 spread in front of her like evidence of a crime she hadn't committed yet, watching the clock tick toward 3 a.m., and then 4 a.m., and then that gray pre-dawn hour when the world felt suspended between darkness and light. The angel ornament sat beside the money, catching what little illumination came through the Kit Lucas window from the streetlight outside. Isabella had hung it on the sad plastic tree in the corner, 2 feet of artificial green with gaps where branches had broken off over the years. The angel looked ridiculous there, too beautiful for its surroundings, like everything in Isabella's life that didn't quite fit. She'd counted the money 4 times. Always the same number. Always impossibly real. Dr. Catherine Huang. Mount Sinai. Tomorrow no. Today now at 10 a.m. Confirmed. Isabella pulled up the doctor's profile on her phone, sitting in that Kit Lucas with drug money or mob money or whatever kind of money a man like Dongmin had access to. Dr. Huang was the kind of specialist who didn't take Isabella's insurance. The kind who had a 6-month wait list. The kind whose consultation fees alone cost more than Isabella made in a month. And somehow, Felix had an appointment in 6 hours. Pride said to burn the money. To show up at that appointment and explain there'd been a mistake. That she couldn't pay. That she was sorry for wasting the doctor's time. Pride said accepting help from dangerous men was how good women became cautionary tales. But Felix was in the next room, his liver slowly failing while Isabella clung to Pride like it could cure him. She was still sitting there when she heard it. A small sound from Felix's bedroom. Not quite a cry. Not quite a whimper. Just a sound that made every maternal instinct in Isabella's body scream. She was moving before conscious thought caught up. Crossing the small apartment in 3 strides. Pushing open Felix's door to find him curled on his side. Arms wrapped around his swollen belly. Face contorted with pain. Baby? Isabella's voice came out strangled. She knelt beside his bed, hand immediately going to his forehead. Burning. The fever was back, higher than before. Felix? Talk to Mama. What hurts? Everything. Felix whimpered, and the word broke Isabella's heart into pieces small enough to scatter. Mama, it hurts so bad. His skin was yellower than it had been at bedtime. The whites of his eyes had taken on that jaundiced tinge that meant his bilirubin levels were climbing. And his belly, his belly was distended, hard and round like a balloon about to burst. Ascites. Fluid buildup. One of the signs that his liver was giving up. Isabella's hands shook as she grabbed her phone. 911. She should call 911. But ambulances cost money, and the ER would just stabilize him and send them home with instructions to follow up with specialists they couldn't afford to see. Except now they could afford it. Now $10,000 sat on her Kit Lucas table like an answer to prayers she'd been too proud to pray. Hold on, baby, Isabella whispered, already moving. Grabbing the go bag she kept packed for hospital visits. We're going to the hospital. They're gonna make you feel better. Promise? Felix's voice was so small, so full of trust Isabella didn't deserve. I promise, baby. I promise. She called a rideshare faster than waiting for an ambulance, cheaper than the bill that would come later. Wrapped Felix in his favorite blanket, the one with the dinosaurs that was too small for him now but that he wouldn't give up. Grabbed the envelope with Dr. Huang's card and Dong Min's number, shoving it in her purse like contraband. The ride to the ER took 12 minutes that felt like 12 hours. Felix cried the whole way. Quiet tears that he tried to hide because he was 6 years old and already understood that his pain was a burden. The driver kept glancing in the rearview mirror, worry written across his face, probably wondering if the kid was going to throw up in his car. Isabella held Felix against her chest and counted his heartbeats, and made promises to God and the universe, and anyone who might be listening that if Felix survived this, she'd be better. Work harder, deserve him more. The ER waiting room was a special kind of hell. Fluorescent lights that made everyone look sick. Plastic chairs bolted to the floor. A TV playing local news that no one watched. The smell of antiseptic trying and failing to mask the smell of illness and fear. It was Christmas Eve. The ER was packed. Isabella checked Felix in, answered the triage nurse's questions with a calm that came from practice rather than feeling. Yes. He has chronic liver disease. Yes. He's on the transplant list. No, we haven't been able to see a specialist recently. No, I don't have good insurance. The nurse's eyes had done that thing eyes do when they catalog you into a category. Single mother. Medicaid. Low priority. It'll be a few hours, the nurse said, not unkindly. We're really backed up tonight. People get sick on holidays. Take a seat. We'll call you. A few hours. Felix writhing in pain, fever climbing, belly swelling. A few hours. Isabella carried her son to the least dirty corner of the waiting room and held him while he cried. Around them, other people waited with their own crises. A man clutching his arm, a woman with a bloody towel pressed to her head, a teenager who couldn't stop coughing. All of them waiting. All of them watching the triage desk, hoping to be called next. 2 hours passed. Then 3. Felix had stopped crying, which was somehow worse than the tears. He lay against Isabella's chest, breathing shallow, skin burning, occasionally whimpering when the pain spiked. We're gonna get you help, baby, Isabella whispered into his hair. I promise. We're gonna get you help. But the waiting room clock kept ticking and no one called Felix's name, and Isabella felt herself spiraling into that particular panic that came from being powerless to help your own child. When they finally called him back, it was 7 a.m. A different nurse. Younger, with tired eyes and a mask that couldn't quite hide her exhaustion. They put Felix in a room, took his vitals, drew blood. The numbers on the monitor were all wrong. Blood pressure too low, heart rate too high, oxygen saturation dropping. The doctor came an hour later, young, harried, already moving on to the next patient in his mind. He examined Felix with efficient detachment, ordered more tests, asked questions Isabella had answered 100 times before. His liver function has deteriorated significantly, the doctor said. And Isabella hated how clinical the word sounded. Deteriorated. Like Felix was a building falling apart instead of a 6-year-old boy who drew pictures of families and asked if Santa knew their new address. We need to admit him for observation. And we need to have a serious conversation about his placement on the transplant list. What does that mean? Isabella's voice came from somewhere far away. It means his MELD-PELD score has increased. He's moved up in priority. But pediatric livers are rare, and the wait list is still long. The doctor looked at his tablet instead of at Isabella. You should also know that without a transplant in the next few months, his prognosis is poor. Poor. Such a polite word for dying. How much? Isabella heard herself ask. For the transplant. If we found a donor. If we could afford it. How much? The doctor finally looked at her. And something like pity flickered across his face. For the surgery, hospital stay, medications, aftercare, between $500,000 and $1 million. Insurance usually covers most of it. But with your plan. He trailed off. They both knew what her plan covered. Almost nothing. He left to arrange Felix's admission. Isabella sat in the hard plastic chair beside her son's bed and felt the last pieces of her world crumble into dust. Felix was dying. She couldn't save him. All the 3 jobs and night shifts and pride and respectability in the world couldn't change that simple, devastating fact. The hallway outside was quieter now. The morning rush not yet started. Isabella walked out, needing air, needing space, needing something she couldn't name. She ended up in a corner near the vending machines, sliding down the wall to sit on the floor like she had every right to take up space in this hospital that was going to let her son die because she couldn't afford to save him. Her purse was still over her shoulder. The envelope with Dr. Huang's card was still inside. And beneath that, the black business card with silver lettering, Dong Min's number. Isabella pulled out her phone. Her hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to unlock it. She found his contact, just his name. No photo. No context. Her thumb hovered over the call button. This was dangerous. This was accepting help from a man who moved in shadows and violence. This was entering a world she didn't understand and probably couldn't escape from once she stepped inside. But Felix was dying, and Isabella had spent 6 years being careful. Being good, being respectable. And what had it gotten her? A son on a transplant list she couldn't afford. Abandoned by every man who'd ever promised to stay, humiliated by a coward in a cafe while strangers watched. Respectability hadn't saved her. Pride hadn't saved her. Being small and grateful and apologetic for existing hadn't saved her. Maybe it was time to try something else. Isabella pressed call. The phone rang once. Twice. On the 3rd ring, he answered. Isabella. Not a question. He'd been waiting. Somehow he'd known she would call. He's dying, Isabella said, and her voice cracked on the words. My son is dying, and I don't know what to do, and She stopped, breathing hard, tears finally breaking through. I need help. Silence on the other end. Not empty silence. The kind that held weight and decision and the sound of someone choosing what happened next. Then, where are you? St. Mary's Hospital. ER. I'm coming, Dong Min said simply. Don't move. Don't sign anything. Don't let them tell you there's nothing that can be done. I'm coming, Isabella. Hold on. The line went dead. Isabella sat on that hospital floor, phone still pressed to her ear, and felt the door to her old life close and the door to something else, something dangerous and unknown and terrifying swing open. She'd made her choice. For better or worse, for Felix's life or her soul. She'd called the devil for help, and he'd answered. If you've ever had to make an impossible choice, you understand what Isabella just did. This is a story about the lengths we go to for the people we love. If you're feeling this moment, hit subscribe. You're part of this family now. Comment below, what would you sacrifice for someone you love? Dong Min arrived 43 minutes later, and the hospital changed around him like weather. Isabella watched from Felix's room as he walked through the ER doors, still in that tailored black suit from the cafe. Moving with the kind of certainty that made people step aside without being asked. 2 men flanked him, not bodyguards exactly, but something close. They stayed near the entrance while Dong Min approached the nurse's station, spoke quietly to the woman behind the desk. Isabella couldn't hear the conversation, but she watched the nurse's face shift from exhaustion to attention, to something that looked like fear wrapped in professional courtesy. Then Dong Min was walking toward Felix's room, and Isabella realized she was holding her breath. He stopped in the doorway, eyes finding hers immediately. Isabella. Just her name. No pity. No judgment. Just acknowledgement that she'd called and he'd come. Like it was the most natural thing in the world for a dangerous stranger to show up at a hospital on Christmas morning because a woman he barely knew had asked for help. How did you get back here? Isabella heard herself ask. They don't let anyone except immediate family. I told them I'm Felix's uncle. Dongmin stepped into the room, and somehow the space felt smaller and safer at the same time. They didn't ask questions, because people didn't ask men like Dongmin questions. They just moved out of the way and hoped not to be noticed. He looked at Felix, still sleeping fitfully in the hospital bed, hooked up to monitors that beeped steadily. Something in Dongmin's expression softened. Not quite a smile, something more complicated, more real. He's beautiful, Dongmin said quietly. He looks like you. Isabella's throat tightened. He's dying. Not today. Dongmin pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, then looked back at her. Dr. Catherine Huang is on her way. She's the best pediatric hepatologist in the state. She'll examine Felix, review his case, and we'll know what we're dealing with. I can't afford. You're not paying. Dongmin's voice was firm but gentle. I am. Consider it handled. Isabella felt something break open in her chest. Anger, maybe. Or relief so intense it felt like anger. Why? You don't know us. You don't owe us anything. What do you want from me? Dongmin was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on Felix rather than on her. When he finally spoke, his voice carried weight. I want nothing from you, Isabella. But I'd like to do something for you. There's a difference. There's always a price. Isabella heard the bitterness in her own voice. Men don't help single mothers out of kindness. They help because they want something. Then I suppose I'm not like the men you've known. Dongmin pulled a chair closer to Felix's bed and sat down, his movements careful, controlled. Dr. Huang will be here within the hour. In the meantime, I'm going to sit here with you. That's all. Just sit. Unless you want me to leave? Isabella should have said yes. Should have told him to take his money and his connections and his dangerous elegance and leave her to handle this alone the way she'd handled everything else for 6 years. Should have protected herself and Felix from whatever complications came with accepting help from a man whose very presence made hospital staff nervous. But she was so tired. So tired of being alone. So tired of being strong when strength felt like just another word for having no other choice. Stay, she whispered. So he did. Dr. Huang arrived 52 minutes later. A petite Korean woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an efficiency that reminded Isabella of surgeons on medical dramas. She examined Felix thoroughly, asked questions Isabella had answered 100 times, reviewed test results on a tablet that someone had brought her, and frowned at numbers that apparently told stories Isabella couldn't read. Then she stepped into the hallway with Dongmin, and Isabella watched through the window as they spoke in rapid Korean. Dongmin's face remained neutral, but Isabella had learned to read the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened when Dr. Huang gestured at the tablet. When they came back, Dr. Huang's expression was professionally sympathetic. Felix's liver function has deteriorated significantly. Without intervention, we're looking at weeks, not months. But there's an experimental procedure, a bridge therapy, that might stabilize him long enough to get him higher on the transplant list. How experimental? Isabella asked. It's been done successfully in Europe, less so here. The success rate is about 65%. But it's his best option right now. Loderna's sign in tears. The supporters succeeded, sir. 65%. Nearly a coin flip. Isabella felt the room tilt. What do you recommend? Dongmin asked. Dr. Huang looked between them, clearly trying to figure out their relationship. Uncle seemed less believable now. I recommend we transfer Felix to Mount Sinai immediately. We have a pediatric intensive care unit that's better equipped. We can monitor him closely, and if he stabilizes enough, we can discuss the procedure. Make it happen, Dongmin said simply. And it happened. Within 2 hours, Felix was being transferred by private ambulance to Mount Sinai, settled into a private room that looked more like a hotel than a hospital, with equipment Isabella had only seen in medical journals and a view of the city that made her apartment's brick wall seem like a cruel joke. Dongmin had made it happen with phone calls in Korean, with quiet words to administrators, with money that moved invisible but unmistakable through the hospital's bureaucracy like blood through veins. How did you do this? Isabella asked as they stood in Felix's new room, watching her son sleep in a bed that probably cost more per night than her rent. I have resources, Dongmin said. Friends in important places. Friends. Isabella turned to look at him. Is that what you call them? Something flickered across his face. Not quite guilt. Not quite pride. I call them what they are. People who owe me favors. People who fear me. People who know that when I ask for something, it's easier to say yes. And what do they fear? Dongmin met her eyes. The truth? Me. What I can do. What I represent. The organization I run. One is ICA. One is ICA. There it was. The admission hanging between them like smoke. Organization. Not business. Not company. Organization. You're Yakuza, Isabella said. Not a question. Korean. Not Japanese. We don't use that word. Dongmin's smile was bitter. But yes. Something like that. My father built an empire of protection and gambling and things I learned not to ask about. When he died, I inherited it. The money. The power. The obligations. I was 23 and stupid enough to think I could make it legitimate. 10 years later, I'm still trying. Why are you telling me this? Because you asked. Dongmin moved to the window, hands in his pockets, shoulders tight. Because you called me for help. And you deserve to know what that help costs. Not in money, but in truth. Isabella sat down in the chair beside Felix's bed, her son's small hand in hers. What do you want from us, Dongmin? Really? He was quiet for so long, Isabella thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I've spent 10 years building an empire I never wanted. Protection rackets. Gambling. Things I'm not proud of. I've made men kneel. Made them bleed. Made myself into something my father would be proud of and something I hate looking at in the mirror. He turned to face her. But I've never felt as powerful as I did watching you hold your head high while that coward walked away. That kind of strength? That's real power. And I wanted to protect it. Even if just for one night. Even if just this once. Isabella understood then. Not everything. But enough. This man who commanded fear and respect and criminal empires felt powerless in the ways that mattered. And somehow, her refusal to be broken by Murphy's cruelty had shown him something he'd forgotten existed. We're both trapped by other people's choices, aren't we? Isabella said softly. Dongmin's laugh was hollow. Every day, they sat in silence after that, watching Felix sleep, listening to machines beep steadily like promises that he was still here, still fighting, still alive. Felix woke around 3 p.m., groggy and confused. His eyes found Isabella first, always Isabella first, and then drifted to Dongmin standing near the window. Mama? Felix's voice was scratchy from the breathing tube they'd had in earlier. Who's that? Mama? That's Mr. Dong baby, remember? From the cafe. Isabella smoothed Felix's hair back from his forehead. He helped get you to this nice hospital. Felix studied Dongmin with the solemn intensity only sick children possessed. Are you a good guy or a bad guy? The question hung in the air like a blade. Dongmin crossed the room slowly, carefully, and knelt beside Felix's bed so they were eye level. When he spoke, his voice was gentle in a way Isabella hadn't heard before. I'm trying to be good, Dongmin said. For you and your mom. Felix considered this. Then, with the brutal honesty of 6-year-olds, you have sad eyes. Like Mama's. Dongmin's breath caught. Isabella watched something crack in his expression. Some carefully maintained wall crumbling. Yeah, Dongmin said quietly. I guess I do. It's okay, Felix said, reaching out to pat Dongmin's hand with his small one. Mama says sad eyes just mean you know how to feel things. And feeling things is good even when it hurts. Isabella felt tears burn behind her eyes. She'd told Felix that after Murphy left, when her son had asked why she looked so sad all the time, she hadn't known he'd remembered. Dongmin stayed kneeling there, this dangerous man brought to his knees by a sick child's kindness. And Isabella watched him choose what happened next. Watched him decide to be gentle instead of hard. To be human instead of untouchable. Your mama's very smart, Dongmin said. You're lucky to have her. I know, Felix said, smiling that smile that lit up rooms. She's the best mama in the whole world. Even when I'm sick and make everything hard. You don't make anything hard, baby. Isabella said fiercely. Don't ever think that. But Felix had already turned back to Dongmin. Do you have a family? Not really, Dongmin admitted. Felix's face fell. That's sad. Everyone should have a family. Maybe you can share ours. Right, Mama? And there it was. The invitation extended with the thoughtless generosity of childhood. the door opening to let darkness sit beside light and see if they could coexist. Isabella looked at Dongmin, saw him looking back, saw something in his eyes that looked like hope and terror in equal measure. Maybe, Isabella said softly. Maybe he can. Felix's condition deteriorated at 11 p.m. that night. Fast and terrifying. Isabella had been dozing in the chair beside his bed when the monitors started screaming. Not beeping, screaming. That high-pitched alarm that meant something was very, very wrong. Felix was awake, gasping, his small hands clutching at his distended belly as his face contorted with pain Isabella felt in her own body. Mama. His voice broke on a sob. Mama. I can't breathe. The room filled with people. Nurses, doctors, someone shouting orders Isabella couldn't process through the panic drowning her thoughts. They pushed her back, away from Felix's bed, away from her son who was reaching for her with terror in his yellowed eyes. Dongmin appeared beside her, his hand on her shoulder the only thing keeping her upright. He'd been down the hall making phone calls, but now he was here, solid and steady while Isabella's world collapsed again. What's happening? Isabella heard herself ask, but her voice sounded wrong, distant. Doctor. Huang was at Felix's bedside, her efficient calm now edged with urgency. She barked orders in medical terminology. Isabella couldn't decode something about hepatic encephalopathy, something about toxins, something about his liver shutting down faster than they'd anticipated. We need to operate now, Dr. Huang said, turning to face Isabella and Dongmin. Her scrubs were already on, like she'd been preparing for this possibility. The experimental procedure we discussed, we don't have time to wait. His body is poisoning itself. Without intervention in the next few hours, his brain will start to swell. He could seize. He could. She stopped. But Isabella heard the word she didn't say. Die. He could die. What are his chances? Dongmin asked, his voice level despite his hand tightening on Isabella's shoulder. With the surgery? 65% survival rate. Without it? Dr. Huang's expression was grim. He won't make it through the night. 65%. A coin flip. Isabella's son's life reduced to barely better than even odds. How much? The question came out strangled. How much does the procedure cost? Dr. Huang hesitated. The surgery alone is 200,000. ICU care afterward. Medications. Monitoring, we're looking at close to 400,000 total. And that's if everything goes smoothly. $400,000. Isabella made 32,000 a year working 3 jobs. She'd need 12 years to earn that much. And that was before rent, before food, before existing. This was impossible. This was, do it, Dongmin said. Isabella turned to stare at him. What? Do the surgery. Dongmin looked at Dr. Huang, his voice carrying absolute authority. Whatever it costs. Whatever you need. I'll handle it. Just save him. Mr. Dong, Dr. Huang started. Now, Dongmin said, and something in his tone made the doctor nod and turn back to coordinating her team. Isabella grabbed Dongmin's arm, her nails digging into expensive fabric. I can't accept this. I can't. $400,000. I don't even know you. What do you want from me? Dongmin looked down at her, and Isabella saw something raw in his eyes, something that looked like desperation matching her own. I want to do one good thing with all this blood money. Let me save your son. Why? Isabella's voice cracked. Why us? There are thousands of sick kids, thousands of mothers who need help. Why are you doing this? Because when I saw you in that cafe, refusing to be small even when that man tried to crush you, I saw something I lost a long time ago. Dongmin's jaw tightened. Dignity. Humanity. The belief that some things are worth protecting, even when it costs you everything. Let me protect this, Isabella. Let me protect him. Please. A nurse approached with consent forms. Isabella's hands shook so badly she could barely hold the pen. $400,000. A stranger's money. Blood money, he'd called it. Money from protection, rackets, and gambling and things he wasn't proud of. Money that came with strings she couldn't see yet, but knew existed anyway. If I sign this, Isabella whispered, what happens to us after? You owe me nothing, Dongmin said firmly. No debt, no obligation. Just let the doctors save your son. The rest we figure out later. Isabella looked through the window at Felix, surrounded by medical staff preparing him for surgery. Her baby. Her whole world. The boy who'd asked if Dongmin was a good guy or bad guy, who'd offered to share their family with a dangerous stranger because everyone deserved family. She signed the forms. Dr. Huang took them, already moving. We'll update you every hour. The surgery will take approximately 8 hours if everything goes well. There's a surgical waiting room on the 4th floor. We'll be there. Dongmin said. They let Isabella kiss Felix before they took him. His skin was burning, his breath shallow, but he managed to smile when she pressed her lips to his forehead. I love you, baby, Isabella whispered. You're going to be okay. You're going to be so okay. Love you, Mama, Felix said, his words slurring slightly from the sedatives they'd already given him. Tell Mr. Dong thank you. He has sad eyes, but a good heart. I can tell. Then they were wheeling him away, and Isabella stood in the empty room watching her son disappear through double doors. Possibly for the last time. 65%. Better than 0. Worse than certain. She would have collapsed if Dongmin hadn't been there to catch her. The surgical waiting room was carpeted in that particular shade of industrial gray that existed only in hospitals and government buildings. Soft chairs arranged in rows like a church. A TV playing muted news. A coffee maker in the corner that probably hadn't been cleaned in weeks. 3 other families scattered around the room, all wearing the same expression of exhausted fear. Isabella and Dongmin sat in the back corner, waiting. The clock on the wall ticked forward with cruel steadiness. 11:30. Midnight. Christmas morning now. Somewhere, families were sleeping peacefully, waiting to wake up to presents and joy. Here, Isabella was waiting to learn if her son would live to see another sunrise. Dongmin had his phone out, typing rapidly in Korean. Isabella watched his thumbs move across the screen, watched his expression shift from neutral to cold to something harder. He made a call, spoke in low, sharp tones that Isabella couldn't understand but recognized as commands, as threats, as the voice of a man who ran an organization built on fear and control. When he hung up, Isabella asked, "What was that?" "Making sure everything is handled," Dongmin said carefully. "The hospital needs deposits before surgery. I'm arranging transfers." "From where?" Isabella asked. Even though she wasn't sure she wanted to know, Dongmin was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you really want to know where the money comes from?" "Yes," Isabella said, surprising herself. "If my son's life is being bought with it, I want to know." Dongmin looked at her. Something like respect flickering in his expression. Gambling operations mostly. Protection fees from businesses in Koreatown. Some investment properties that generate legitimate income. But that money's tied up in trusts. The liquid cash comes from the less legitimate operations. So Felix's surgery is being paid for by people losing money at illegal casinos and business owners paying you not to hurt them. "Yes," Dongmin said simply. "I won't lie to you about what I am, Isabella. My hands aren't clean. They never will be. But right now, those dirty hands are the only thing standing between your son and death. So you tell me, does it matter where the money comes from if it saves him?" Isabella didn't have an answer. 6 months ago, she would have said yes. Of course it matters. Pride matters. Principles matter. But 6 months ago, Felix wasn't dying on an operating table while she sat helpless in a waiting room. "I heard you," Isabella said quietly. "Earlier, on the phone, you were speaking Korean, but I heard your tone. You were threatening someone." "The hospital administrator," Dongmin admitted. He was concerned about whether the money would clear in time. I convinced him it would. "How?" Dongmin's smile was cold. "I reminded him that his daughter's private school tuition is expensive and that it would be unfortunate if he suddenly couldn't afford it. I also reminded him that I know which restaurants he takes his mistress to and that his wife might find that information interesting." Isabella should have been horrified. Should have been disgusted. Instead, she felt something else. Something that felt dangerously like gratitude. This man had used his power, his terrible, criminal power, to save her son. Had threatened and manipulated and leveraged fear to make sure Felix got the care he needed. "Thank you," she whispered. Dongmin looked at her sharply. "For blackmailing a hospital administrator? For doing whatever it takes," Isabella said. "I've spent 6 years being good. Being respectable. Following rules. And it got me exactly nowhere. You've known us for 24 hours, and you've done more for Felix than anyone else in his entire life. So yes. Thank you. Thank you. Something shifted in Dongmin's expression. The hardness softened slightly. The distance closed just a fraction. You're not afraid of me. I'm terrified of you, Isabella corrected. But I'm more terrified of losing my son. So right now, your fear is useful. My fear is just in the way. They sat in silence after that, the TV droning soundlessly above them, other families coming and going as their own surgeries finished or began. 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m. Time stretched and compressed, each minute feeling like an hour, while hours passed like seconds. At 4:17 a.m., Dongmin spoke again. I've never felt needed before, only feared. My father taught me that respect and fear are the same thing, that power means making people afraid to cross you. But sitting here, watching you fight for your son, using my resources to actually help someone instead of hurt them. He stopped, jaw working. I didn't know it could feel like this. Like what? Isabella asked. Like maybe I'm not completely damned, Dongmin said quietly. Like maybe there's still something worth saving in me. Isabella looked at this dangerous man who'd inserted himself into her life like a knife, sharp and potentially deadly, but currently pointed at her enemies instead of her. Felix said, you have sad eyes. He also said you have a good heart. Kids can tell things adults forget to see, or they're too innocent to recognize danger. Maybe, Isabella said. Or maybe danger isn't the same thing as evil. Maybe you've just been using your power for the wrong reasons until now. Dongmin laughed, but it sounded broken. I've hurt people, Isabella. Ruined lives. Broken bones and wills and families. Don't romanticize what I am. I'm not, Isabella said firmly. I know what you are. I know your money comes from pain and fear. I know you've done terrible things. But I also know you're here, at 4 a.m. on Christmas morning, sitting in a hospital waiting room because a woman you barely know needed help. So maybe you're complicated instead of simple. Maybe you're capable of both cruelty and kindness. Maybe you're human. Dongmin stared at her like she'd spoken a language he'd forgotten existed. Then, so quietly, Isabella almost missed it. I haven't felt human in 10 years. Isabella reached out and took his hand. Not romantically, not sexually, just human touch. Comfort offered and accepted. Well, she said, Felix seems to think you are. And he's a pretty good judge of character for a 6-year-old. Dongmin's fingers tightened around hers, and they sat like that in the surgical waiting room. Two people who'd been strangers 36 hours ago, connected now by desperate circumstances and a sick child and the strange, terrible gift of being seen. Dr. Huang found them at 7:43 a.m. Still holding hands, still waiting. Isabella saw her, first the surgeon coming through the double doors in scrubs splattered with what Isabella's brain registered as blood, before logic reminded her that blood during surgery was normal, expected, part of the process of cutting someone open to save them. Doctor. Huang pulled down her surgical mask, and Isabella couldn't read her expression. Neutral. Professional. The face doctors wore when they were about to deliver news that would change everything. Isabella stood. Dongmin stood with her, his hand still wrapped around hers like an anchor. Felix made it through surgery, Dr. Huang said, and Isabella's knees buckled. Dongmin caught her, but she barely registered his arms around her because all she could hear was made it through, and surgery and the absence of the words, I'm sorry, that she'd been bracing for since they'd wheeled Felix away 8 hours ago. He's alive? Isabella's voice came out strangled. He's alive, Dr. Huang confirmed, and something that might have been a smile flickered across her exhausted face. The procedure was successful. We were able to stabilize his liver function significantly. He'll need close monitoring for the next 48 hours, and he's not out of the woods yet, but the prognosis is good. Better than I expected. Honestly, your son is a fighter. Isabella heard the words through a fog. Alive. Successful. Good prognosis. Fighter. Each word landed like a blow, knocking loose the terror she'd been holding at bay for 8 hours, for 6 years. For every moment since the doctors had first told her Felix's liver was failing and there was nothing they could do except wait and hope. Can I see him? Isabella asked. He's in recovery now. Give us another hour to get him settled in ICU. Then yes, you can see him. Doctor. Huang looked at Dongmin. Both of you. I've already informed the staff that Mr. Dong is family. Then she was gone. called away to another crisis, another surgery, another family waiting for news that would change their world. Isabella stood in the waiting room surrounded by other people's fear and hope and grief, and she felt something inside her shatter. She made it to the corridor before the sobs came. Great, gasping, full-body sobs that felt like they were tearing her apart from the inside. All the fear she'd been holding back, all the terror and helplessness and desperate prayer came flooding out in ugly, uncontrollable waves. She slid down the wall to sit on the floor, arms wrapped around her knees, crying so hard she couldn't breathe. Dong-min found her there. Didn't say anything. Just sat down beside her on the cold hospital floor and pulled her against his chest. One arm around her shoulders, the other hand stroking her hair. He let her break. Let her sob into his expensive suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Let her shake and gasp and fall completely apart while he held her together. He's alive. Isabella gasped between sobs. He's alive. He's alive. He's alive. He's alive. Dong-min repeated softly, his accent making the words sound like a prayer. You did it, Isabella. You saved him. You saved him. Isabella corrected, pulling back enough to look at him through tear-blurred vision. You did this. Your money, your connections, your... She stopped, fresh tears spilling over. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me, Dong-min said, wiping tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. Watching you fight for him, that was thanks enough. Isabella wanted to argue, wanted to explain that saving her son's life required more than gratitude, required something bigger than words could contain, but her voice was gone, used up by crying. So she just leaned her forehead against his shoulder and let herself be held while hospital staff walked past, pretending not to notice. When she could finally breathe again, Isabella stood on shaky legs. I need to pray. I need to... There's a chapel, right? Hospitals have chapels. 3rd floor, Dong-min said, standing with her. I saw it earlier. The chapel was small, and interfaith crosses and stars of David and Islamic calligraphy all sharing the same quiet space. Empty at this hour except for Isabella and Dong-min, who followed her inside like a shadow she couldn't shake. Isabella knelt in one of the pews, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles went white. She didn't have words at first. Just gratitude so overwhelming it felt like drowning. Then, slowly, the prayer took shape. Thank you, Isabella whispered. Thank you for Felix's life. Thank you for bringing him through surgery. Thank you for... She stopped, glancing at Dong-min standing near the door, respectful distance maintained. Thank you for sending help even when it came in a form I didn't expect, even when it came from places I don't understand. She paused, then continued, voice dropping even lower. Forgive me for accepting help from a dangerous man, for letting my son's life be saved with money that came from pain, for choosing survival over righteousness. If that's sin, then I'm guilty. But I'd make the same choice again, and again, and again, because Felix deserves to live, and I'll trade my soul for his life, if that's what it costs. Your God must be kind to have created you, Dong-min said quietly from behind her. Isabella turned to find him closer than she'd realized, standing in the aisle with something raw in his expression. Why do you say that? Why? Because you still believe in forgiveness, Dong-min said. Still believe that choices made from love can be justified. I stopped believing that a long time ago. Started thinking every choice I made was just another step toward damnation, so why not embrace it completely? Isabella stood, facing him fully. The chapel was quiet except for the hum of ventilation and the distant sounds of hospital life beyond the walls. Why us? She asked. Really, Dong-min, there are thousands of struggling families, thousands of sick kids, thousands of single mothers drowning in debt and fear. Why did you choose us? Dong-min was silent for a long moment, his jaw working like he was chewing on words too dangerous to say. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because when I saw you refuse to be small in that cafe, I saw what I lost when I became this. He gestured at himself, the expensive suit, the tattoos, the carefully controlled violence, dignity, pride, humanity. I've spent 10 years turning myself into something that can survive in my father's world. Something hard and cold and untouchable. And I succeeded. But success felt like death, like becoming a ghost in an expensive suit. He took a step closer. And then I saw you, this woman in a second-hand dress, publicly humiliated. Every reason to shrink and hide and accept what that coward said about her. But you didn't. You held your head high. You walked out of that cafe like a queen, leaving a room full of peasants. And I thought, his voice cracked, I thought maybe if I could protect that in you, I could find it again in myself. Maybe saving something pure could purify me just a little. Maybe doing one good thing with all this blood money could make me feel human again. Isabella felt tears burning behind her eyes again, but these were different. Not fear. Not relief. Something else entirely. You're not damned, she whispered. You're just lost. There's a difference. Is there? Dongmin's smile was bitter. I've hurt people, Isabella. Done things that would make you run if you knew the details. My hands are stained so deep, no amount of good deeds will wash them clean. Maybe not, Isabella said, taking a step toward him. But maybe stained hands can still do good work. Maybe broken people can still love. Maybe lost souls can still find their way home if someone's willing to light a candle in the dark. Something shifted in Dongmin's expression. The careful control slipped. The walls cracked. And then he was moving, closing the distance between them, his hands coming up to cup her face with a gentleness that felt impossible from someone so dangerous. Isabella, her name on his lips, sounded like a question, like permission being asked. She answered by rising on her toes, closing the last inch of space between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that felt like falling and flying at the same time. His mouth was warm, gentle, tasting like coffee and exhaustion and something she couldn't name but recognized anyway. His hands trembled against her face. This man who commanded criminal empires shaking because a struggling single mother was kissing him in a hospital chapel on Christmas morning. The kiss was soft, careful, full of everything they couldn't say and everything they were afraid to feel. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Isabella saw something in Dongmin's eyes that looked like wonder. I didn't expect this, Dongmin whispered. Neither did I, Isabella admitted. But Felix is alive and you made that happen, and I think maybe... A knock on the chapel door interrupted her. A nurse, young and apologetic, stuck her head in. Miss Edwards, your son is awake. He's asking for you, and for his uncle. She glanced at Dongmin with barely concealed curiosity. Isabella and Dongmin looked at each other, something passing between them that felt like promise and terror in equal measure. Then they were moving, following the nurse through corridors that suddenly felt less institutional, less cold. Because Felix was awake and asking for them both. The ICU was quieter than the ER had been. Private rooms with glass walls, sophisticated monitoring equipment, nurses who moved with competent efficiency. Felix's room was at the end of the hall, and through the window Isabella could see him so small in the hospital bed, but awake, his eyes open and tracking movement. When she walked in, Felix's face lit up with that smile that made everything worth it. Mama. Isabella was at his bedside in an instant, careful of the tubes and wires, pressing kisses to his forehead. Hi, baby. How do you feel? Tired, Felix said, his voice rough from the breathing tube. And sore, but better. The doctor said they fixed my liver. They helped it, Isabella corrected gently. You're going to be okay, Felix. You're going to be so okay. Felix's eyes found Dongmin standing near the door, respectful distance maintained. Mr. Dong? You stayed? Dongmin moved closer. His expression soft in that way Isabella was learning to recognize. Of course I stayed. Had to make sure you were okay. Felix reached out his small hand, and Dongmin took it carefully, mindful of the IV. Santa came early, Felix said, his smile drowsy but genuine. He sent me a mom protector. That's you, right? You protect Mama and me now? Dongmin's breath caught. Isabella watched him struggle with words, with promises, with the weight of a sick child's trust. Yeah, he finally said, his voice rough. Yeah, Felix. I protect you both now. Good, Felix said, his eyes already drifting closed again. Mama needs someone. She pretends she's okay, but she cries at night when she thinks I'm sleeping. Now she has you, so maybe she won't cry anymore. Isabella felt her heart crack open. Dongmin looked at her, something fierce and protective flashing in his expression. And in that moment, in that ICU room on Christmas morning, 3 people who'd been strangers became something else. Family. Chosen. Complicated. Built on desperation and blood money and impossible circumstances. But family nonetheless. The black town car Dong Min had arranged pulled up to Isabella's apartment building 3 days after Felix's surgery, and the contrast was almost obscene. Sleek luxury against chipped concrete. The driver, one of Dong Min's men, quiet and professional, helped carry Felix upstairs while Isabella juggled medical equipment and discharge papers that detailed a recovery plan she could barely afford to follow. Except she didn't have to afford it anymore. Dong Min had handled everything. The medications, the follow-up appointments, the specialized diet Felix would need. All of it arranged with phone calls in Korean and money that moved invisibly through systems designed to keep people like Isabella out. Felix was drowsy from pain medication, his small body still healing from having been cut open and stitched back together. But he was alive. His skin had already started losing that yellow tinge. His eyes clearer than they'd been in months. The doctors had used words like remarkable recovery and exceeded expectations, but Isabella knew the truth. Her son was alive because a dangerous man had decided he was worth saving. Mrs. Lucas met them at the door, her face creased with relief and concern in equal measure. She helped Isabella get Felix settled on the couch, surrounded by pillows, the TV playing cartoons at low volume. The apartment felt smaller than Isabella remembered, shabbier. The plastic Christmas tree in the corner with its missing branches suddenly looked pathetic next to the memory of Mount Sinai's tasteful decorations and soft lighting. "Thank you, Mrs. Lucas," Isabella said, pressing money into the older woman's hand money Dong Min had given her, though Mrs. Lucas didn't need to know that. "I can manage from here." Mrs. Lucas hesitated, her eyes darting to the town car still visible through the window, to the driver standing watch by the building entrance. "Isabella, is everything okay? These men, this car, everything's fine," Isabella said, more firmly than she felt. "Felix is going to be okay. That's all that matters." After Mrs. Lucas left, Isabella sat beside Felix on the couch, watching him sleep, counting his breaths like prayers. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and distant sounds of neighbors living their uncomplicated lives. She should have felt relief, peace. Her son was alive and healing, but instead, she felt the weight of obligation settling on her shoulders like a coat made of lead. Dong Min had saved Felix's life with blood money and criminal connections. What did that make her? What kind of mother accepted help from a man whose hands were stained with violence? The knock on the door came 20 minutes later. Sharp, insistent. Isabella's stomach dropped before she even looked through the peephole. Murphy stood in the hallway, and rage rolled off him like heat. Isabella opened the door but didn't step aside. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same question." Murphy's voice was tight, controlled in that particular way that meant he was barely holding himself together. "You're supposed to be at St. Mary's, with Felix. In recovery. But you checked out early, and when I called to check on him, they told me he'd been transferred days ago. To Mount Sinai. A private room. A specialist who doesn't take your insurance." His eyes narrowed. "So I did some research, Isabella. And you know what I found?" Isabella's hand tightened on the doorframe. "You need to leave. Dong Min Park," Murphy continued, his voice rising. "That's the man from the cafe, isn't it? The one who witnessed your humiliation and decided to play hero. Except he's not a hero, Isabella. He's a criminal. Korean organized crime. Protection rackets. Illegal gambling. Money laundering. There are court documents. News articles about his father's organization. And you brought him into Felix's life?" "Lower your voice," Isabella said through gritted teeth. "Felix is sleeping. Of course he is. Probably on pain medication you couldn't afford. Prescribed by doctors you have no business seeing. All paid for by a gangster." Murphy stepped closer, and Isabella saw something ugly in his expression. Self-righteousness mixed with wounded pride. "I was trying to save you from yourself. Give you a stable life. A normal family. But you threw that away. And now you're involved with a man like that? With Felix in the picture?" Something inside Isabella snapped. Not broke, snapped like a branch that had been bent too far, too long, finally springing back with force. "Stable?" The word came out sharp enough to cut. "You call hiding my son stable? You call asking me to pretend he doesn't exist normal? You rejected us, Murphy. You walked away. You called Felix a mistake in front of a room full of strangers. I made a practical decision. You made a cowardly one." Isabella's voice was steady now, cold. "And yes, Dong Min helped us. That gangster did more for my son in 24 hours than you did in 6 months. He didn't see Felix as a complication or a mistake. He saw him as a boy worth saving. Can you say the same? Murphy's face flushed red. You're putting Felix in danger. Don't you understand that? These people, Dongmin's world, it's violent. There are rivals, enemies, people who would hurt a child to get to him. You think you're protecting Felix, but you're putting a target on his back. The words landed like punches, each one finding the fear Isabella had been trying to ignore. Because Murphy wasn't completely wrong. Dongmin's world was dangerous. She'd seen it in the way hospital staff had moved when he made calls. Heard it in his tone when he spoke Korean to his associates. She'd accepted help from darkness. And darkness always came with a price. I'll report this, Murphy said, sensing her hesitation. Call CPS. Tell them you're living off criminal money. Exposing Felix to dangerous people. Unfit mother. They'll investigate. Take him away if they have to. I'll do it, Isabella. To save him from you. Isabella felt the words like a physical blow. Unfit mother. The accusation she'd been running from for 6 years. The fear that lived in her bones that she wasn't enough, that Felix would be taken, that loving him wasn't sufficient to keep him. I suggest you reconsider that threat. The voice came from behind Murphy, low and controlled, and Isabella watched all the color drain from Murphy's face. Dongmin stood at the top of the stairs, and the hallway suddenly felt smaller, more dangerous. He was still in the clothes from the hospital, slightly rumpled now, but his presence was undimmed. He moved past Murphy like he was furniture, positioning himself between the other man and Isabella's doorway. How much did you hear? Murphy asked, trying to sound brave and failing. Enough. Dongmin's voice was quiet, but there was something underneath it that made Isabella's skin prickle. Not anger, something colder. You threatened to take her child, to report her for accepting help that saved his life. That seems... He paused, head tilting slightly. Cruel, even for someone who calls 6-year-olds mistakes. I'm trying to protect her from you, Murphy said. But he'd taken a step back. Your world. Your violence. My world kept her son alive, Dongmin said simply. Your world let him die slowly while judging his mother for not being perfect enough to deserve help. Which of us is truly dangerous, Mr. Murphy? The formal address was somehow more threatening than any curse would have been. Murphy looked between them. Calculation working behind his eyes. She doesn't know what she's getting into. You'll destroy them both. Perhaps. Dongmin's expression didn't change. But I'll do it while protecting them with everything I have. You had the chance to be her hero. You chose to be her villain instead. Don't make the mistake of thinking I'll let you hurt her twice. The silence stretched between them, thick with threat. Murphy opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. His world will destroy you both, he said finally, looking at Isabella. And when it does, don't say I didn't warn you. Then he was gone, footsteps heavy on the stairs, and Isabella heard the building door slam behind him. She stood in her doorway, shaking, while Dongmin remained perfectly still in the hallway. When she finally found her voice, it came out small. Is he right? Dongmin turned to face her. Yes. The honesty was somehow worse than a lie would have been. My life is dangerous. Dongmin continued quietly. I have enemies, people who would hurt anyone I care about to get to me. Murphy isn't wrong about that. Bringing you and Felix into my world does put you at risk. Isabella felt something crack inside her chest. Then why? Because leaving you to face this alone puts you at greater risk. Dongmin stepped closer, and Isabella saw exhaustion in his eyes. Without Felix's treatment, he dies. Without resources, you drown. Without protection, men like Murphy think they can threaten you with impunity. My world is dangerous, Isabella. But your world without help is fatal. So what do we do? Isabella asked. Just accept that loving you means living in danger? Something flickered in Dongmin's expression at the word loving, but he didn't address it. We be careful. Smart. I teach you how to protect yourself. How to recognize threats. I keep men watching your building. I make sure anyone who wants to hurt you knows the cost will be higher than they're willing to pay. That's not a life, Isabella whispered. That's a siege. It's survival, Dongmin corrected gently. And survival is all we get sometimes. But Isabella, he reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. I swear on everything I am, I will keep you safe. Both of you. Whatever it costs me, Isabella looked down at their joined hands. His fingers were warm, strong, unmarked by the violence they'd likely committed. And what happens when the cost is too high? When keeping us safe means becoming something even darker than you already are? Then I pay it, Dongmin said simply. Because the alternative is watching you and Felix suffer. And that, his voice dropped to barely a whisper, that would destroy me faster than any rival could. From inside the apartment, Felix called out sleepily, Mama, is Mr. Dong here? Isabella looked at Dongmin, at this dangerous man who'd saved her son and threatened her peace in equal measure, and made her choice. Yes, baby, she called back. He's here. He's staying for dinner. Dongmin's eyes widened slightly. Isabella, if we're doing this, Isabella said firmly, if we're choosing this dangerous, complicated thing between us, then we do it properly. No more hallway conversations. No more you protecting us from a distance. You come inside. You sit at our table. You let Felix see that the man protecting us is also the man willing to be present for the ordinary moments. Understood? Something like wonder crossed Dongmin's face. Then, quietly, understood. Isabella stepped aside, holding the door open, and Dongmin, this powerful, feared man, who commanded criminal empires with a phone call, walked into her small apartment like he was stepping into church, reverent and grateful and terrified all at once. Behind them, through the window, the town car remained. The driver kept watch. The old world and the new, colliding in a hallway that smelled like industrial cleaner and someone else's cooking. And Isabella closed the door on Murphy's warnings, on respectability's demands, on every safe choice she'd ever made that had led her nowhere but alone. She chose danger. She chose protection. She chose Dongmin. And whatever came next, they would face it together. Dongmin made the offer 3 days later, standing in Isabella's Kit Lucas while Felix napped on the couch, and the afternoon light turned everything golden and deceptive. Come, stay at my place, just until Felix is fully recovered. It's safer. More comfortable. I have security. Medical equipment if he needs it. Space for him to heal properly. He said it casually, like he was offering to drive her to the grocery store instead of inviting her into his life completely. Isabella stood at the sink, hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had gone cold. Her apartment suddenly felt even smaller, with Dongmin in it, his presence too large for the cramped Kit Lucas with its chipped counters and flickering overhead light. I can't accept that. Why not? Because... Isabella stopped, searching for words that made sense. Because we barely know each other. Because moving into your home means something. Because I've spent 6 years building independence, and accepting this feels like giving it all away. Dongmin was quiet for a moment, then moved closer. Not touching. Just present. What if independence isn't the same as being alone? What if accepting help doesn't mean losing yourself? It means finally having space to find yourself. Isabella looked at him, at this man who'd somehow become essential in the span of a week. And what happens when Felix recovers? When we're not in crisis anymore? Do we just stay? If you want to. Dongmin's voice was soft. Isabella, this isn't charity. It's not even protection, really. It's... He stopped, jaw working. It's me asking you to let me be part of your family. Let me do this, please. Isabella thought about Murphy's warnings, about the very real danger Dongmin's world represented, about the fact that she was considering uprooting her son and moving them into a stranger's home because that stranger had saved Felix's life and looked at her like she was something precious instead of something broken. Okay, she heard herself say, until Felix recovers, then we'll see. The penthouse was in a building Isabella had passed 100 times but never imagined entering. Doorman in uniform, marble lobby, elevator that required a key card for the top floor. When the doors opened directly into Dongmin's apartment, Felix's gasp echoed Isabella's own shock. It wasn't what she'd expected. Not cold or sterile or aggressively masculine. The space was warm, lived in, with art on the walls, some traditional Korean landscape paintings, some modern abstract pieces that looked like storms captured on canvas, books in English and Korean lined built-in shelves. A Kit Lucas that was clearly used, not just for show, and everywhere. Small touches that spoke of someone who'd tried to make this place feel like home and hadn't quite succeeded until now. This is for you, Dongmin said, leading Felix down a hallway to a bedroom that made the boy stop in his tracks. The room was perfect. Not overwhelming, not trying too hard. A bed with soft blue sheets, a desk by the window, shelves waiting for books and toys, and in the corner, a Christmas tree, small but real, decorated with lights and ornaments that looked handpicked rather than designer coordinated. Wrapped presents sat underneath, and Felix looked up at Isabella with wonder in his healing eyes. "Is this mine?" Felix asked, his voice small. "Yes," Dongmin said, kneeling down to Felix's level. "All yours, as long as you need it." Felix launched himself at Dongmin, arms wrapping around the man's neck, and Isabella watched this feared crime boss close his eyes and hold her son like he was something infinitely precious. "Thank you, Mr. Dong, this is the best room ever." Isabella's room was across the hall, equally thoughtful. A queen bed with a view of the city, an attached bathroom with a tub deep enough to actually soak in, a reading chair by the window. It felt like peace made tangible, and Isabella stood in the doorway, feeling tears burn behind her eyes. "It's too much," she whispered. "It's not enough," Dongmin said from behind her. "But it's what I can give right now." Christmas morning came 2 days later, and Isabella woke to Felix's excited whisper. "Mama! Mama, wake up! Santa found us." She stumbled into the living room to find her son kneeling by the tree, counting presents with reverent fingers. Dongmin was already up, wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt that made him look younger, more human, less like the dangerous man who commanded empires from shadows. "I didn't know what he liked," Dongmin admitted quietly. "So I asked the nurse at Mount Sinai what he talked about. She said dinosaurs and art supplies and a specific Hot Wheels track he'd seen in a commercial. The presents weren't expensive for the sake of being expensive. They were thoughtful. A dinosaur encyclopedia, quality markers and sketch pads, that exact Hot Wheels track, a stuffed elephant to replace the one that had started falling apart." Felix opened each gift with the kind of joy that made Isabella's chest ache, and when he threw his arms around Dongmin and said, "This is the best Christmas ever," Isabella saw something crack in Dongmin's expression. Something that looked like hope learning to breathe. "I'll make breakfast," Dongmin said, and Isabella followed him into the Kit Lucas, watching as he pulled out ingredients with practiced ease. "You cook?" "My grandmother taught me before she died," said a man who can't feed himself is only half alive. He started mixing batter, his movements efficient. "These are jun, Korean pancakes. Felix might like them." Isabella watched him work, this dangerous man making breakfast in soft morning light, and felt something shift inside her. "Can you teach me?" Dongmin looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "You want to learn? I want to understand your world. The good parts of it. The parts that made you who you are. Beneath all the armor." So he taught her how to mix the batter, the right temperature for the pan, the way to flip them without breaking. Felix wandered in, drawn by the smell, and Dongmin lifted him onto a stool to watch. "Your mama's learning Korean cooking. What do you think?" "I think we should teach Mr. Dong about our Christmas traditions," Felix said seriously. "Mama makes the best candied yams, and we always watch a Charlie Brown Christmas while we eat cookies." "Then that's what we'll do," Dongmin said. And Isabella felt tears threatening again at how easily he made space for their traditions, their culture, their way of being. They spent Christmas Day trading stories. Isabella taught him about Black American Christmas music, about the importance of certain foods, about the way her grandmother had made holidays magical even with nothing. Dongmin shared Korean winter traditions, taught Felix how to say Merry Christmas in Korean, explained the meaning behind some of the art on his walls. And Felix was simply happy. No worried glances at his mother, no anxiety about money or being a burden, just a 6-year-old boy experiencing Christmas the way children should, with wonder and security and the knowledge that he was loved. Isabella caught herself staring at Dongmin while he helped Felix build the Hot Wheels track, watching the gentle patience in his hands, the soft smile he probably didn't know he was wearing. This man had killed people, she was certain, had hurt people, commanded violence with phone calls. But right now, he was on the floor of his penthouse helping a sick child build a toy track. And the tenderness in his movements made her heart stutter. Dongmin looked up and caught her watching. "What are you thinking?" The truth came out before she could stop it. That I'm terrified, and that I haven't been this happy in 6 years. Something fierce crossed Dongmin's expression. He stood, crossed to where she sat on the couch, and took her hands in his. "I know this is complicated. I know my world is dangerous and your trust has been shattered and this all happened too fast. But Isabella," his voice dropped to barely above a whisper, I want this. Not just until Felix recovers. Not just until the danger passes. I want you both here. I want to wake up to Felix's laughter and your smile, and the feeling that maybe, finally, I'm doing something right with this life I inherited. What if I can't be what you need? Isabella asked. What if I'm too broken? Too complicated? Then you'll fit perfectly with me, Dong Min interrupted. Because I'm all those things too. We can be broken together. We can be complicated together. We can build something real out of all our sharp edges and scars. Isabella looked at Felix, happily playing with his new toys, healthier than he'd been in years. Looked at this apartment that felt more like home than any place she'd lived. Looked at Dong Min, this dangerous, gentle man who saw her and didn't look away. I want to stay, she said quietly. Not because I have to. Not because it's safer. But because when I imagine going back to my apartment, back to being alone, it feels like stepping backward into a life that doesn't fit anymore. Dong Min's smile was small but real. Then stay. Build a life here. Let me be part of yours. It won't be easy, Isabella warned. Your enemies. My past. All the ways this could go wrong. Nothing worth having is easy, Dong Min said. But I'd rather fight for this for us than live safely and alone. Felix called out from across the room. Mama! Mr. Dong. Come see. The track is done. And as they moved to admire his work, Isabella felt something inside her settle. Not all her fears. Not all her doubts. But the certainty that this strange, dangerous, beautiful thing they were building was worth the risk. Outside, snow had started to fall. Inside, a family that had been fragments was learning to be whole. And in that moment, on Christmas morning in a penthouse overlooking a city that had never been kind to her, Isabella Edwards finally understood what it meant to bloom. 6 months later, Isabella stood at a podium in front of a room full of single mothers and looked nothing like the woman who'd been humiliated in a cafe on Christmas Eve. The community center was in a renovated building in her old neighborhood. The space bright and welcoming with play areas for children, offices for caseworkers, a medical clinic staffed by rotating volunteers. Above the entrance, elegant letters spelled out Bloomhaven. And every time Isabella saw those words, she thought of Dong Min's voice in that cafe. You are blooming, Isabella Edwards. She was. God, she was. I was taught to be ashamed of being a single mother, Isabella said into the microphone, her voice steady and strong. To hide my struggle. To apologize for existing. To make myself small so other people could feel comfortable with my pain. She paused, looking out at the faces, watching her women who understood exactly what she meant. But shame only grows in silence. In community, in support, in accepting help, that's where we bloom. That's where we become who we're meant to be. In the back of the room, Dong Min stood with Felix at his side, and the pride in his expression was visible even from a distance. He'd funded all of this, the building, the staff, the programs, but he'd insisted Isabella run it. This is your vision, he'd said. Your strength. I'm just providing the resources you should have always had. Felix was healthy now. Really healthy. His skin clear, his energy boundless, his laughter frequent and unforced. He'd started second grade 2 months ago and come home talking about friends and field trips and how his teacher said he was good at math. He called Dong Min Uncle Dong and understood, with the wisdom of children who'd seen too much too soon, that their family was different, but that different wasn't wrong. Isabella finished her speech to applause. And as she stepped down from the podium, women came to thank her, to ask questions, to simply touch her hand like she was proof that survival was possible. She answered each one with patience and genuine care. This woman who'd learned to take up space instead of shrinking from it. Dong Min was waiting by the door when the crowd finally dispersed. You were magnificent, he said quietly. I was terrified, Isabella admitted. Public speaking isn't exactly my strength. Could have fooled me. Dong Min's hand found hers, the gesture so natural now it didn't even require thought. Ready to go home? Home. The word still made something warm bloom in Isabella's chest. The penthouse had become theirs over these months. Felix's artwork on the refrigerator, Isabella's books on the shelves, family photos that documented their strange journey from strangers to something deeper. Dong Min had changed too. Not completely, he still had his organization, still made calls in Korean that Isabella knew better than to ask about. But he was transitioning slowly, moving money into legitimate businesses, using his connections for protection without violence when possible. It wasn't perfect. There were still threats, still dangerous men who saw Dongmin's happiness as weakness to exploit. But he was trying, and that effort meant everything. They were walking to the car when Isabella's phone buzzed. An unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her press accept. Isabella. The voice was familiar and unwelcome. It's Murphy. Isabella stopped walking. Dongmin's hand tightened on hers, his expression shifting to something alert and dangerous. What do you want? Isabella asked, her voice cold. To warn you. There are men asking questions about Dongmin, about you and Felix. Federal agents. I thought you should know before a sound in the background. Then the line went dead. Isabella looked at Dongmin, fear spiking through her chest. Someone's investigating you. Federal agents asking about us. Dongmin's expression remained neutral, but Isabella had learned to read the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened when calculating threats. I know. They've been watching for weeks, but they won't find anything that connects to you or Felix. I've made sure of it. Made sure how? Isabella demanded. Dongmin, if something happens to you, if they arrest you or worse, they won't. He cupped her face with both hands, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. Isabella, I've been preparing for this since the day you moved in. Everything is protected, legal. If anything happens to me, you and Felix are taken care of. The center is funded through trusts. Your safety is guaranteed. I don't want guarantees, Isabella said fiercely. I want you. Here. With us. Something soft crossed Dongmin's face. Then I'll stay. I'll be careful. I'll do whatever it takes to keep us together. The threat proved real 2 days later when 3 black SUVs pulled up outside Bloomhaven while Isabella was inside teaching a financial literacy class. Dongmin's security team called immediately federal agents conducting interviews, asking about Dongmin's business dealings, his associates, his relationship with Isabella Edwards. Isabella was in the middle of explaining compound interest when Dongmin appeared in the doorway, and she knew immediately that something was wrong. She excused herself, met him in the hallway, and saw the carefully controlled fear in his eyes. They're coming for me, he said quietly. Not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But soon. I wanted you to hear it from me first. Isabella felt the world tilt. What did you do? Protected you, Dongmin said simply. When threats started coming, rival organizations who saw you as my weakness, I made sure they understood that touching you would cost them everything. But I made those threats through channels the FBI has been watching. I chose your safety over my freedom, Isabella. I'd make that choice again. Quote 10. Quote 10-9. For a moment, Isabella couldn't breathe. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, holding tight. We'll fight this. Get lawyers. Figure it out. We will, Dongmin agreed. But Isabella, if it comes down to it, if they make an offer that means you and Felix stay safe in exchange for me going away, don't, Isabella said fiercely. Don't you dare make that decision without me. We're family. We figure this out together. That evening, they sat at dinner, Isabella, Dongmin, and Felix in the penthouse that had become their home. Felix chattered about school, about a project he was working on, about how his friend Jason had invited him to a birthday party next week. Normal kid things. Beautiful kid things. Dongmin was quiet, watching Felix with something that looked like memorization, like he was trying to capture every moment in case there weren't many left. After Felix went to bed, Isabella found Dongmin on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. She wrapped her arms around him from behind, pressing her cheek against his back. Do you regret it? Dongmin asked quietly. Choosing this complicated life? Isabella thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago. Broken, ashamed, drowning. Thought about the woman she was now fierce, purposeful, loved. Every flower blooms differently, she said. Some need full sun. Ours bloomed in shadows. But look how beautiful it is. Dongmin turned in her arms, and Isabella saw tears in his eyes. I love you, he said, the words rough and raw. I should have said it before. Should have told you every day. I love you, Isabella. Both of you. More than I knew I could love anything. I love you too, Isabella whispered. Whatever happens, that doesn't change. They stood there holding each other while the city breathed below them. Two people who'd found each other in darkness and built something worth fighting for. Guys? Felix's voice came from the doorway, sleepy and curious. Are you guys going to get married? So, both adults laughed, the sound breaking the heavy moment. Dongmin knelt down as Felix patted over. Would you be okay with that? Felix pretended to think hard. Only if I can be the ring bearer. And if we can have Korean and American food at the wedding. Uncle Dong's jun and Mama's candied yams. Deal? Deal, Dongmin said, pulling Felix into a hug. Isabella watched them, this man who'd been a dangerous stranger and this boy who'd been called a mistake, and felt something settle in her chest. Not peace exactly. Not safety, but something deeper. The knowledge that whatever came next, they would face it as they'd faced everything else. Together. 3 weeks later, federal agents did come, but they found records carefully maintained, business dealings that towed the line of legality, and nothing that could touch Isabella or Felix. Dongmin's lawyers were good, his preparations thorough, and while the investigation continued, it moved slowly, giving them time. Time to plan a wedding. Time to watch Felix thrive. Time to build the life they'd chosen from broken pieces and blood money, and desperate prayers answered by the most unlikely savior. From a humiliating breakup on Christmas Eve to a family forged in impossible circumstances, you just witnessed a complete transformation. If this story moved you, subscribe. I find stories like this. Stories about people who refuse to stay broken. And I share them here. Don't miss the next one. On a Sunday morning, Isabella stood in their Kit Lucas watching Dongmin teach Felix how to make kimchi fried rice while explaining the importance of each ingredient. Felix listened intently, asking questions, his small hands mimicking Dongmin's movements. And Isabella thought about how far they'd come from that cafe on Christmas Eve. Some angels fall to save others. Some demons rise to protect them. They were neither. They were just people who'd found each other in the wreckage and decided that broken pieces could still build something whole, something real, something worth every risk they'd taken to protect it. Mama, Felix called, come help. Uncle Dong says 3 cooks are better than 2. Isabella crossed the Kit Lucas to join her family. And as Dongmin's arm wrapped around her waist and Felix's laughter filled the space, she understood finally what blooming meant. Not perfection, not safety, not the absence of danger or pain or consequence. Just this. Choosing to grow anyway. Choosing to open anyway. Choosing to love anyway. And that, Isabella thought as she kissed Dongmin's cheek and ruffled Felix's hair, was enough. That was everything.